I welcome you to my channel. Subscribe and listen to my new stories every day. My life wasn't supposed to end up like this. 10 years of marriage to Jessica, and everything seemed perfect on the surface. We had the kind of life people envied: 2 kids, a cozy house in the suburbs, weekend barbecues, and vacations that made our neighbors jealous. If anyone asked, they'd think we had it all figured out. But deep down, I always had this gnawing feeling. It started small, creeping in like a whisper I could ignore, but over the last few months, that whisper had turned into a deafening roar I couldn't shake. It was subtle at first. Jessica started coming home late. Not just occasionally, work always had its busy periods, but more often. The excuses were always the same: dinners with clients, catching up with friends, last-minute meetings. Nothing that would raise suspicion if you didn't know better. But I did. I could feel it in the way she avoided eye contact when she talked about her day, the way she clutched her phone like it was a lifeline, never letting it out of her sight. Still, I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, we were happy, weren't we? Sure, things had gotten routine after 10 years, but that was normal. People didn't stay in the honeymoon phase forever. Life, work, kids, they all got in the way of the excitement. That's just how it was. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. One Saturday morning, I woke up and found Jessica already dressed. She was never up this early, not unless she had somewhere to be. I squinted against the sunlight streaming through the blinds and asked her where she was going. "Errands," she said, avoiding my gaze. "I'll be out for a while, don't wait up for me." That was when I knew. I didn't ask for details or push her for an explanation. I just nodded and let her walk out the door. But as soon as she was gone, I felt my stomach knot up. This wasn't just a casual Saturday of grocery shopping. She was going to meet someone. I was sure of it. I got out of bed, my mind racing. I couldn't ignore this anymore. I had to know what was going on. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my keys and followed her out the door, making sure to keep a safe distance. I'd never done anything like this before, never thought I'd be the kind of husband who followed his wife around like some jealous fool. But something deep inside was telling me this was bigger than a hunch. I needed to see it with my own eyes. Jessica drove across town, past the grocery store, past her usual haunts, until she pulled into a small cafe I'd never been to. She parked the car, checked her reflection in the mirror, something she rarely did when she was just running errands, and got out. I parked far enough away that she wouldn't notice me and watched her walk inside. My heart was hammering so hard in my chest that I thought I might pass out. And then I saw him. Tall, athletic build, sharp suit, he was everything I wasn't. Jessica walked right up to him, smiling in a way I hadn't seen her smile in months. It wasn't the casual smile she gave me at the end of a long day or when the kids did something funny. No, this was different. This was the kind of smile reserved for someone who made your pulse race. They hugged, and my stomach dropped. Then, just as I was about to lose my mind, they kissed. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me, a heat so intense that I thought I might explode. But instead of storming over there and confronting them like some movie hero, I did nothing. I sat there, paralyzed, as they disappeared into the cafe. My mind raced with all the ways I could confront her, all the things I wanted to say, but none of it seemed right. I couldn't just barge in there. That wouldn't fix anything. It would only give her the satisfaction of knowing I cared enough to fight. I drove home, numb. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the anger had subsided, replaced by something else: determination. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. No, if Jessica wanted out of our marriage, I was going to make sure she paid for it. I wasn't the kind of man to roll over and play the victim. If she thought she could sneak around behind my back, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next few days passed in a blur. Jessica went about her routine as if nothing had changed, while I pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was making plans. I knew I needed to act carefully. She had been sneaky, but I could be smarter. I wasn't going to let this slide, but I wasn't about to make a scene either. I had something better in mind. I waited for my moment, and it came sooner than I expected. A few days after that morning at the cafe, Jessica left her phone on the counter while she was in the shower. She never left her phone unattended, and I knew this was my chance. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was locked, of course, but I knew her password. 10 years of marriage gives you that kind of access. I opened her messages, scrolling through the names I recognized until I found one I didn't, Tom. My heart raced as I opened the conversation, and there it was. Proof. Explicit texts, pictures, everything I needed to confirm what I already knew. She wasn't just cheating, she was fully invested in this guy. The realization hit me like a freight train, but instead of confronting her right then, I put the phone back where I found it and went back to my chair. That night, I lay in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully. My mind raced with all the ways I could get back at her. I wasn't going to be the guy who just sat by and let her walk all over me. She had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to do something about it. The next morning, while Jessica was at work, I packed up her things. I wasn't going to confront her with accusations or anger. No, I was going to let my actions speak for themselves. Every piece of clothing, every keepsake, every reminder of her life here with me, I packed it all up and put it in a storage unit I had rented the day before. I left nothing behind except a single note on the kitchen counter: I know everything. Don't come back. Then, I called my lawyer. That evening, after packing up all of Jessica's things and arranging for the storage unit, I sat in our now eerily quiet house, feeling the weight of my decision. My heart was pounding, adrenaline still coursing through me from the afternoon's work. The kids were staying at my parents' place for the weekend, so the house was still. The silence made everything feel surreal. I had been planning this moment in my head for days, maybe even weeks. But now that it was happening, part of me felt hollow, almost disconnected from the man who had just thrown his marriage away with one swift act of defiance. Was this what I wanted? Was it the right way to handle it? As much as I had dreamed of revenge, a small part of me wondered if there was any way to salvage what we had built together. But then I remembered the messages, the betrayal. No, there was no coming back from that. I went to bed early, my body exhausted but my mind racing. Sleep was a distant hope, and I lay there for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how Jessica would react when she walked into the empty house. Would she cry? Would she try to apologize? Would she be angry? No matter how many scenarios played out in my head, I knew I had to stay strong, not let her guilt or manipulation pull me back in. This was it. I wasn't going to be a doormat any longer. I had left the house to go pick up the kids when Jessica came home from work. Part of me wished I could be there to see her face, to see the moment of realization when she understood what I had done. But I knew it would be better this way. If she wanted to fight, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of an audience. She'd find the note, the empty closet, and that would be enough. When I got back to the house with the kids, Jessica's car was already in the driveway. I parked on the street, not ready to face whatever scene might be unfolding inside. My son, Ethan, noticed immediately. "Why is Mom's car here?" "I thought she was working late," he said, confused. "Maybe she got off early," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You guys go ahead inside. I'll be in a second." The kids bounded up to the front door, blissfully unaware of the chaos brewing behind it. I lingered for a moment, drawing in a deep breath before following them. My pulse quickened as I opened the door and stepped inside. Jessica was standing in the living room, staring down at the note I had left on the counter. The second she saw me, her eyes flashed with a mix of disbelief and anger. Her face was flushed, her body stiff as if she had just been hit with a tidal wave of reality. "What the hell is this, Jack?" she spat, waving the note in the air. "You think you can just throw me out like some kind of guest?" I didn't answer right away. I took off my jacket slowly, hanging it on the back of the chair before turning to face her. The kids were already in their rooms, giving us a moment of privacy before the inevitable explosion. "Yeah, I do," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "I'm done, Jessica. I know about Tom." Her face twisted into a mask of fury, the calm demeanor she had likely practiced on the way home crumbling in an instant. "What are you talking about? Tom? You've been spying on me now." I took a step closer, forcing myself to remain composed. "Don't lie to me, Jess. I saw the texts. I followed you. I know everything. The dinners, the weekends, the lies. You've been sleeping with him." Her mouth opened, but no words came out at first. She was cornered, and I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out what to say. She had always been quick with words, always able to talk her way out of tight spots. But this time, she couldn't deny the truth. "So what, Jack?" she finally said, her voice shaking. "What do you expect me to say? It happened. It wasn't supposed to, but it did. And it's not like things were perfect between us, either. You've been so distant." "Don't turn this on me," I cut her off, my voice rising slightly. "I've been here, Jess. I've been here with you, with the kids, working my ass off for this family while you've been sneaking around behind my back. You want to blame me for your affair? No, you don't get to do that." She looked away, crossing her arms over her chest, as if she could shield herself from the truth of her own actions. I could see her struggling, trying to regain control of the situation, trying to find a way to spin it so she wasn't the villain in her own story. "What do you want me to say?" she whispered. "That I'm sorry." "Fine, I'm sorry. But that doesn't change the fact that we haven't been happy in years. You know that." I didn't respond immediately. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a flicker of something that almost resembled sympathy. Maybe she was right. Maybe things hadn't been perfect. But that didn't give her the right to destroy everything we had built together. "Maybe we weren't happy," I said quietly, "but you didn't even try to fix it. You went behind my back, Jessica. You lied to me, to the kids. You took something that was already fragile and you shattered it." Her eyes flickered with emotion, but she didn't move. We stood there in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging in the air between us. I could feel the finality of it sinking in, the realization that there was no going back from this. "What do you want me to do, Jack?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper now. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I want you to leave. I packed your things. You can pick them up from the storage unit. I'll text you the address." She blinked, as if the words hadn't registered right away. "Leave? You're kicking me out?" "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm done. You can go be with Tom, or whoever else you've been seeing, but you're not staying here anymore." Jessica stared at me, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, it seemed like she was going to argue, but then she just deflated, her shoulders sagging as the fight drained out of her. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll go." Without another word, she walked past me, grabbed her purse from the chair, and headed for the door. I stood there, watching her go, half expecting her to turn around and beg for another chance. But she didn't. She just opened the door and left. I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange emptiness settle over me, like the calm after a storm. I had won, in a sense. But it didn't feel like a victory. The kids came out of their rooms a few minutes later, and I plastered on a smile for them. I knew they were going to have questions, and I wasn't ready to give them answers. But that would come later. Right now, I just needed to get through the night. After putting them to bed, I sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where Jessica used to sit. The house felt different now, quieter, lonelier. But I knew I had done the right thing. I couldn't let her betrayal go unanswered. I couldn't be the guy who just forgave and forgot. This was only the beginning. The day after Jessica walked out, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. Not just quiet, but hollow. The absence of her presence seemed to echo in every corner, as if the walls themselves knew something had changed. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, staring into my coffee, trying to process the reality of what had happened. She was gone. Not just temporarily, but gone for good. The kids were quiet too. They hadn't asked any questions yet, but I knew they could feel the tension in the air. Ethan and Sarah weren't stupid. They could sense the shift, even if they didn't understand it yet. I tried to keep things normal, but how do you act like nothing has changed when everything has? As I packed their lunches and got them ready for school, I could feel Ethan watching me. At 10, he was old enough to know something was off, but still young enough to not want to face the reality of it. I handed him his backpack, and he lingered in the kitchen doorway, his brow furrowed. "Dad?" he finally asked, his voice cautious. "Yeah, bud?" I answered, trying to keep my tone light. "Where's Mom?" I should have been prepared for the question, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you explain something like this to your kids? How do you tell them that the person they trust, the person they love, has betrayed them just as much as she betrayed you? "She had to leave for a little while," I said, my voice steady, but my heart heavy. "Things are complicated between us right now." He frowned, not satisfied with the answer, but too polite to press further. "She'll come back, though, right?" I hesitated, hating that I couldn't give him the reassurance he wanted. "I don't know, Ethan. I really don't." He nodded slowly, processing that before turning away. Sarah was already at the front door, waiting for me to take them to school. As we drove, the car was filled with an uncomfortable silence. I had always loved these morning rides, listening to their chatter about school, friends, and whatever silly topic came to mind. But today, there was none of that. Just the weight of unspoken questions. After I dropped them off, I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to pull myself together. It was harder than I thought it would be. I had expected to feel some sense of relief after making Jessica leave, some sense of closure. But all I felt was exhaustion and an overwhelming sadness. Even after all she had done, part of me still missed her. I missed the life we had built, the family we had been. And now it was all shattered. I knew I had to move forward. There was no going back. But I didn't know what forward even looked like. How do you rebuild after something like this? How do you explain to your kids that their mother isn't coming back the way they want her to? Later that day, I got a text from Jessica. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. What was there left to say? She had made her choices, and I had made mine. But a part of me knew we weren't done yet. "Not really." "What do you want to talk about?" "The kids. Everything. Please." I didn't want to have this conversation, not yet. But I also knew it was inevitable. We had to figure out what came next, for their sake if nothing else. "Fine. Come by the house after work." I wasn't sure what to expect when she came over that evening. Part of me wondered if she would try to beg for another chance, to apologize and promise things would change. The other part of me dreaded the possibility that she'd come in defiant, refusing to accept her role in all of this. When she arrived, she looked different, tired, worn out. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced with a quiet nervousness I hadn't seen in her before. She stood at the door for a moment before coming inside, like she wasn't sure if she belonged here anymore. And she didn't. Not really. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where I had left the note that ended everything. I could tell she was struggling to find the right words, but I wasn't going to help her. I just waited. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you, and I know I messed everything up. But I need to figure out how to fix this, for the kids. They deserve better than this." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what to say. Sorry wasn't going to fix anything. But at least she was acknowledging the damage she had caused. "I don't know how to do this," she continued. "I don't know how to be, without you. But I need to make things right for them. I can't just disappear from their lives." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "You didn't just hurt me, Jessica. You hurt them. You lied to them, too. How do you expect to fix that?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw real regret. Not just for what she had done to me, but for what she had done to our family. "I know. I don't know how to fix it. But I want to try. Please, Jack. I'll do whatever it takes." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she could make it right, that we could somehow co-parent without the bitterness of betrayal poisoning everything. But I wasn't sure I could. I wasn't sure I could trust her with the kids, let alone anything else. "They love you," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean they'll forgive you easily. You have to prove to them that you can still be their mother. And that means showing up. Consistently. No more lies. No more disappearing for weekends with him." Jessica flinched at that last word, and I felt a pang of satisfaction. She deserved to feel the sting of her own choices. But even that small victory felt hollow. "I'll be there," she said, her voice breaking. "I promise. I'll be there for them." For the next hour, we talked logistics, how to manage visitation, how to explain things to the kids without dragging them into the mess of our relationship. It was clinical, detached, but necessary. There was no room for emotions right now. We had to figure out how to keep our family together, even if we weren't together anymore. As she got up to leave, Jessica hesitated at the door. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked, her voice so small I almost didn't hear her. I didn't have an answer for her. Part of me wanted to say yes, that time would heal things, that eventually we'd find a way to be civil, maybe even friendly. But another part of me knew that the scars she had left weren't going to fade anytime soon. Maybe ever. "I don't know," I said honestly. She nodded, looking down at her feet. "I'm sorry, Jack. For everything." I didn't respond. I just watched her walk out the door and into the night, the same way she had the night before. Only this time, I knew she wasn't coming back. After she left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the door. There was no satisfaction in the emptiness. No relief in her apology. Just the lingering ache of everything that had been broken and couldn't be put back together. But this time, I didn't feel as hollow. This time, I felt a small glimmer of something else, a sense of closure, maybe, or just the beginning of something new. Something that was mine, and mine alone. The kids were asleep by the time I checked on them, their small bodies curled up under their blankets, oblivious to the chaos that had just unfolded. I stood in their doorway for a while, watching them, trying to remind myself why I had to keep moving forward, why I couldn't let Jessica's betrayal define me. I wasn't sure what the future looked like now, but for the first time, I felt like I had the strength to face it. In the weeks that followed Jessica's departure, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The house was quieter, but I found a strange kind of peace in the solitude. The kids had adjusted better than I expected, and while they still asked about their mother, they seemed to accept that things had changed. They didn't press for details, and I didn't volunteer any. Jessica had moved into a small apartment a few miles away, and we'd worked out a co-parenting schedule. Every other weekend, she'd take them, and during the week, we'd talk about school events or doctor's appointments like any other parents. On the surface, things were stable. The pieces were falling into place. But inside, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was still wrong. I didn't miss Jessica as much as I thought I would, but the weight of what had happened lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. One Friday afternoon, the kids were with Jessica for the weekend. I had the house to myself, and though the silence was oppressive, I found comfort in the routine I had created. I planned to spend the evening working on a project for the office, maybe order takeout, and then catch up on some mindless TV. A quiet, predictable night. But that night, nothing went according to plan. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Jessica. "Can you come over? It's important." My stomach tightened. Jessica rarely reached out like this anymore, and when she did, it was always about the kids. This felt different. I stared at the message for a few moments, debating whether I should even respond. Part of me didn't want to deal with whatever it was. But another part of me knew I had to. There was still unfinished business between us, things that neither of us had addressed, and maybe this was the time. "Be there in 20 minutes, I replied. The drive to Jessica's apartment felt longer than usual. The streets were dark and empty, the autumn air sharp against the windows. As I pulled into the parking lot, a sense of unease settled over me. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to be good. When I knocked on her door, it took a few moments for her to answer. When she did, the first thing I noticed was how tired she looked. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying for hours. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. "Jessica, what's going on?" I asked, stepping inside. The small apartment was dimly lit, and the air felt heavy, like the weight of her emotions had filled the room. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the couch and sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together in her lap. I stood in the doorway, unsure whether to sit or stay where I was. "Jack," her voice cracked, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I don't know how to say this." My heart pounded in my chest. "Just say it," I urged, the tension building inside me. "I'm sick." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen, as the weight of what she'd said sunk in. "Sick? What do you mean?" My voice was barely a whisper. Jessica looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers nervously. "I went to the doctor a few weeks ago. I've been feeling off for a while, but I thought it was just stress, you know. From everything with us, the move, the kids. But it's not that. It's cancer." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Cancer. The word echoed in my mind, refusing to settle into place. I hadn't expected this. I had braced myself for an argument, a plea for reconciliation, maybe even more lies. But not this. What kind of cancer?" I asked, my throat tight. "Lung cancer," she said quietly. "It's advanced. Stage 4. I sat down across from her, my mind racing. "How? You don't even smoke." "I don't know. The doctor said it can happen to anyone. Maybe it was environmental, maybe it was just bad luck." Her voice was flat, almost robotic, like she had rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times before I arrived. I stared at her, trying to process the reality of what she was saying. The woman who had betrayed me, who had torn apart our family, was now facing something far worse than anything I could have imagined. And as much as I had hated her for what she'd done, I couldn't help but feel a deep, aching sadness. Not just for her, but for our kids, for the life we had lost, and for the one she might not get to keep. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head, wiping a tear from her cheek. "The doctors are going to try treatment, chemo, radiation, but they're not optimistic. They said I might have a year. Maybe less. A year. My mind reeled at the thought. A year to live. How was I supposed to process that? How were the kids supposed to understand that? The kids, I started, but the words caught in my throat. How was I supposed to tell them their mother was dying? How could anyone? Jessica broke down, her tears falling freely now. I don't know what to do, Jack. I don't know how to tell them. I don't know how to be their mom when I'm not going to be here for them. I moved to sit beside her, my hand resting awkwardly on her back. I had spent the last few months hardening myself against her, building a wall between us to protect myself from the hurt. But now, in this moment, none of that mattered. She was still the mother of my children. And no matter how much she had hurt me, I couldn't hate her now. Not like this. We'll figure it out, I said quietly, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We'll tell them together. They'll need both of us for this. Jessica nodded, her sobs quieting as she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. We stayed like that for a long time, the silence between us heavy with all the things we hadn't said, all the things we had lost. That night, as I drove home, the weight of everything hit me like a tidal wave. The betrayal, the divorce, the anger, it all seemed so small now, so insignificant in the face of what was coming. I had thought that by making her leave, I was taking control of my life, getting my revenge. But in the end, life had a way of making you realize how powerless you really are. Jessica was dying. And nothing I did, no matter how much I wanted to, could change that. The next morning, I sat the kids down and told them the news. There were tears, confusion, anger, all the emotions I had expected. But through it all, I held them close, trying to be the strong one, even though inside I was breaking. In the months that followed, Jessica's health deteriorated faster than anyone expected. The treatments didn't work. By the time Christmas rolled around, she was too weak to leave the hospital. The last time I saw her, she was barely conscious. I sat by her bed, holding her hand, watching as the woman I had once loved slipped away. She didn't say much, she couldn't, but I could see in her eyes that she was sorry. Sorry for everything. And as I sat there, watching her fade, I realized that the revenge I had wanted so badly didn't matter anymore. In the end, there was no victory, no satisfaction. Just loss.